The mining drill bit through another layer of crystalline rock on the remote world of Kepler 438b. The automated systems hummed quietly as they extracted rare minerals that would power human colonies for decades. Emma Rodriguez wiped sweat from her brow and checked the readings on her handheld scanner. The numbers made no sense. According to galactic surveys, this world should have been barren. The soil composition was all wrong for supporting life. The atmosphere contained trace elements that should have been toxic to most known species. Yet here she stood, breathing easily in the modified environment that human terraforming teams had created in just 18 months. Emma had been working as a xenobiologist for the Galactic Council for 7 years. She had seen dozens of worlds that various species had attempted to colonize. Most failed within the first year. The few that succeeded took decades to establish basic infrastructure. But humans seemed to operate by different rules entirely. She walked toward the main settlement, passing fields of earth crops that somehow thrived in alien soil. The genetic modifications should have taken years to develop, but human agricultural teams had produced viable seeds within months of arrival. Children played in parks that had been carved from hostile wilderness. Their laughter echoed across valleys that should have been uninhabitable. The communication terminal in the science station crackled to life. A voice spoke in the universal translation protocol that all council members used. Dr. Rodriguez, this is Administrator Vex from the Ethereal Collective. We need your latest report on human expansion patterns. Emma hesitated. The official reports she had been filing painted a picture of steady but unremarkable growth. Humans were staying within their assigned sectors, following galactic regulations and developing their worlds at acceptable rates, but the reality she witnessed daily told a different story. Administrator, the humans are exceeding all projections. Their population growth is accelerating beyond our models. Their technological development is advancing faster than any species we have on record. The silence stretched for several seconds. When Vex finally responded, his mental voice carried the ethereal equivalent of dismissal. Dr. Rodriguez, you may be experiencing observational bias. The Council has determined that human expansion remains within acceptable parameters. Please continue your standard reporting schedule. Emma stared at the communication device. She had provided detailed evidence of human capabilities that far exceeded their supposed primitive status. Food production numbers that defied physics. Manufacturing output that required industrial capacity they supposedly did not possess. Population distributions that suggested coordination far beyond what isolated colonies should achieve. That evening, she sat in her quarters reviewing data from across human space. The official council databases showed exactly what they wanted to see: humans struggling with basic colonization challenges. Modest growth rates, primitive technology barely modified from their homeworld designs, but Emma had been collecting her own data. She had friends and colleagues stationed on dozens of human worlds. Their private communications painted a completely different picture. Humans were not just surviving in conditions that would kill most species. They were thriving and expanding in ways that seemed impossible. Dr. Tom Wilson on Haven 7 reported that humans had increased agricultural output by 400% using methods that combined Earth biology with alien chemistry in ways that should not have worked. Engineer Lisa Park on New Terra described manufacturing facilities that produced materials stronger than anything in the galactic database. Anthropologist David Kim on Frontier Station documented social structures that allowed thousands of humans to coordinate complex projects without central authority. Emma began connecting the dots. Every human world she had data from showed similar patterns. Rapid adaptation to local conditions. Technological improvements that surpassed galactic standards. Most importantly, evidence of communication and resource sharing between colonies that were supposedly independent. She accessed the galactic trade networks and found more anomalies. Human colonies were trading with each other using routes that did not appear on any council maps. They were sharing technologies that individual worlds should not have been able to develop independently. Resource allocation patterns suggested they were operating as a single economic unit despite being spread across hundreds of star systems. The revelation hit her while reviewing population genetic data. Human colonies were not just growing through natural reproduction. They were receiving coordinated waves of migration from Earth and other established worlds. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. Someone was planning these expansions. With military precision, Emma spent the next week carefully analyzing communication patterns between human worlds. Standard galactic protocols use quantum entanglement networks that the Council monitored. But humans had developed their own communication systems that operated on frequencies the Council had never bothered to explore. She intercepted fragments of these communications. The content was encrypted using methods that combined human-computer science with alien mathematical principles. But the metadata told a story that made her blood run cold. Humans were not just talking to each other. They were coordinating, planning, building something that spanned their entire species. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Emma had been studying human genetic samples to understand their remarkable adaptability. Every human she tested carried genetic markers that should not have existed. Modifications that enhanced intelligence, physical capabilities, and most disturbing of all, what appeared to be biological quantum communication interfaces. Humans were not just expanding randomly through space. They were not just adapting to local conditions through trial and error. They were operating as a single organism with thousands of bodies spread across hundreds of worlds. Every human was connected to every other human through biological and technological networks that made them collectively intelligent in ways the galaxy had never seen. Emma stared at her data for hours, trying to process what she had discovered. 50 years ago, the Council had encountered what they believed was a primitive species barely capable of space travel. They had assigned humans a few worthless worlds and expected them to fade into obscurity like countless other species before them. Instead, humanity had been quietly building something unprecedented. They had studied every aspect of galactic civilization while pretending to be grateful junior partners. They had identified weaknesses in galactic infrastructure and positioned themselves to exploit them. Most terrifying of all, they had been preparing for something that the Council could not even imagine. Emma looked out her window at the thriving human settlement below. Children played in parks that existed because humans had made the impossible routine. Adults worked in industries that produced materials that surpassed anything the galaxy had ever created. All of it coordinated by a species that was far more dangerous than anyone realized. She began typing her real report. Not the sanitized version the Council wanted to see, but the truth about what humanity had become. As she worked, she wondered if anyone would believe her. And more importantly, she wondered if it was already too late to stop what humans had set in motion. Commander Rex Thorne received the intelligence report while reviewing patrol schedules for the Outer Rim sectors. The Cronin military had been tracking unusual activity in human space for months, but the data had been filed as routine expansion monitoring. Now, looking at the compiled information, Rex felt his scaled skin grow cold. Humans were everywhere. Not through conquest or invasion, but through infiltration so subtle that most species had not even noticed. They worked as technical advisors in ethereal research facilities. They served as logistics coordinators for Trader Guild operations. They provided engineering support for worlds that had struggled with basic infrastructure for centuries. Rex pulled up the employment records from the past 5 years. The pattern was clear once he looked for it. Humans consistently volunteered for the most dangerous, difficult, and unrewarding positions in galactic society. They worked in radiation-soaked mining operations that would kill most species within weeks. They repaired atmospheric processors on worlds with toxic environments. They maintained trade routes through pirate-infested space that other species abandoned. Each individual human seemed unremarkable. They followed orders, completed their assignments, and rarely drew attention to themselves. But collectively, they had positioned themselves at every critical point of galactic infrastructure. If humans suddenly disappeared, half the galaxy would stop functioning within days. The communication array in Rex's office buzzed with an urgent message. The planet Zarian 7 was experiencing a cascading industrial failure that threatened to collapse manufacturing across 3 sectors. The automated systems that controlled planetary production had suffered a quantum cascade failure that no one understood how to repair. Rex dispatched a Cronin engineering team to assess the situation. Their report arrived 6 hours later. The failure was beyond current galactic repair capabilities. The quantum matrices that controlled industrial production had become corrupted in ways that would require completely rebuilding the planetary infrastructure. The cost would bankrupt several species. The time required would cause supply shortages that could trigger galactic recession. 3 days later, Rex received another report that made him question his own sanity. Human engineering teams had not only repaired the failed systems, but had improved them. Zarian 7 was now producing 300% of its previous output using 50% less energy. The humans had accomplished in 72 hours what Cronin engineers estimated would take years. Rex requested a meeting with the human coordinator who had led the repair effort. Director Paul Kim arrived at the Cronin military station wearing the simple coveralls of a maintenance worker. He carried a tablet filled with technical specifications that made Rex's military engineers look like children playing with toys. "How did you repair something that our best minds said was impossible to fix?" Rex asked, his voice carrying the growl that indicated serious Cronin interest. Paul smiled with the calm confidence that Rex had learned to associate with dangerous humans. "We saw a problem that needed solving. Our teams had encountered similar quantum cascade failures on 17 different worlds over the past 3 years. We developed repair protocols that work for any system based on galactic standard architecture." Rex felt his combat instincts trigger. "You have encountered this problem 17 times? These failures are supposed to be random quantum events that occur maybe once per century." "Commander, nothing in the universe is truly random. Every system has patterns. Every failure has causes. We study these patterns and prepare solutions before problems occur. It is how humans approach everything." The conversation continued for 2 hours. Rex learned that humans had been documenting and analyzing every aspect of galactic civilization since first contact. They understood alien psychology better than the aliens understood themselves. They had identified critical vulnerabilities in galactic infrastructure that could cause civilization-ending disasters. Most disturbing, they had developed solutions for problems that had not yet occurred. Rex spent the next week investigating human activities across known space. What he found challenged everything he thought he knew about galactic power structures. Humans were not just adapting to alien environments, they were improving them. Worlds that had struggled with basic survival for centuries were thriving under human management. Trade routes that had been marginally profitable were generating unprecedented wealth with human optimization. The breakthrough came when Rex analyzed human expansion patterns using military strategic planning software. Human colonies were not randomly distributed through space. They formed a network that provided coverage for every major galactic civilization. Every critical trade route passed through human-controlled space. Every important resource extraction operation relied on human technical support. Rex called a meeting with his intelligence staff. The briefing room filled with seasoned Cronin military officers who had spent decades studying galactic threats. Rex presented his findings with the clinical precision that his species valued. Humans have been conducting a stealth invasion of galactic civilization for 50 years. They have positioned themselves at every critical junction of our infrastructure. They have made themselves indispensable to our survival. If they chose to withdraw their support, galactic civilization would collapse within months. The room erupted in angry discussion. Cronin military doctrine emphasized direct confrontation with clearly identified enemies. The idea that humans had conquered the galaxy through competence and helpfulness was almost impossible for his officers to accept. Colonel Zaravos, Rex's most experienced intelligence officer raised a clawed hand for silence. Commander, if this analysis is correct, then humans have accomplished something unprecedented. They have achieved galactic domination without firing a single shot. They have made conquest unnecessary by making themselves necessary. Rex nodded. Grimly, that is exactly what they have done. But the question we must answer is why? What is the purpose of this elaborate infiltration? What are humans preparing for? The answer came from an unexpected source, Dr. Emma Rodriguez, the xenobiologist who had been filing reports about human expansion, requested a private meeting with Rex. She arrived at his office carrying data files that contained evidence of human capabilities that far exceeded anything in the official council records. Commander, I have been studying human development patterns for 7 years. They are not just expanding through space. They are building something that spans their entire species. Every human is connected to every other human through biological and technological networks that make them collectively intelligent. Emma presented her evidence with the careful precision of a scientist who knew her conclusions would be questioned. Genetic modifications that enhanced human intelligence and physical capabilities. Communication networks that operated on frequencies the Council had never explored. Resource allocation patterns that suggested coordination on a scale that no species in galactic history had achieved. Dr. Rodriguez, if your analysis is correct, then humans are not just a species. They are a force of nature. They have become something that operates on a completely different level from anything we have encountered. Emma nodded solemnly. Commander, I believe humans have been preparing for something that the rest of us cannot imagine. They have been studying every failed civilization in galactic history. They have identified the patterns that lead to collapse. They have positioned themselves to prevent those patterns from destroying us. Rex stared at the data files scattered across his desk. 50 years ago, the Council had encountered what they believed was a primitive species barely capable of space travel. Instead, they had encountered something that might be the next stage of evolution itself. Humans had not just joined galactic civilization. They had quietly assumed responsibility for its survival. The implications were staggering. If humans were preparing for some unknown threat, then they possessed knowledge that the rest of the galaxy lacked. If they had made themselves indispensable to galactic survival, then they had also made themselves the guardians of every species in known space. Rex began composing a report that would change how the galaxy understood humanity. As he worked, he wondered if the rest of galactic civilization was ready to learn that their quiet human partners had been protecting them all along. Supreme Ethereal Zindar floated in the meditation chamber at the center of the Galactic Council headquarters. The crystalline walls pulsed with the collective mental energy of thousands of ethereal minds working in harmony. For the first time in centuries, that harmony was disrupted by fear. Reports flooded in from every corner of known space. Human colonies had appeared in star systems that galactic surveys had marked as uninhabitable. Human-designed technologies were outperforming equipment that had been refined by advanced civilizations for millennia. Most disturbing of all, several minor species had begun requesting human protection and guidance, bypassing the Council entirely. Zindar extended his consciousness through the quantum network that connected all ethereal minds, the collective. Knowledge of his species painted a picture that challenged their understanding of biological evolution. Humans were not just intelligent. They were collectively intelligent in ways that no species in galactic history had achieved. The discovery had begun with routine monitoring of human neural patterns. Ethereal telepaths had been observing human thought processes for decades, cataloging them as primitive but potentially useful. But recent scans revealed something that made no sense according to current biological theory. Human minds were linked, not through technology or artificial interfaces, but through biological quantum entanglement that operated on frequencies that should not exist in nature. Every human consciousness was connected to every other human consciousness through networks that spanned thousands of light years. Instantaneously, Zindar focused his attention on a human research facility orbiting the star Vega. Dr. Lisa Chun A human physicist working within the ethereal collective had been studying quantum consciousness theory for 3 years. Her research had advanced understanding of mental energy manipulation far beyond what any single mind should accomplish. Through careful mental probing, Zindar discovered that Lisa was not working alone. Her consciousness was simultaneously connected to thousands of other human minds across the galaxy. She could access the memories, knowledge, and insights of any human who had ever lived. Her research was actually the combined intellectual effort of the entire human species. The revelation deepened when Zindar extended his probe beyond individual human minds. The quantum networks that connected human consciousness were not random. They formed patterns that resembled the neural structures of a single massive brain. Humanity was not just a species. It was a single organism with billions of bodies spread across hundreds of worlds. Zindar called an emergency session of the Galactic Council. Representatives from every major species gathered in the great chamber that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. The holographic displays showed star maps that revealed the true scope of human expansion. "Fellow beings," Zindar began, his mental voice carrying the weight of cosmic revelation, "we have discovered that our understanding of humanity has been fundamentally incorrect. They are not a primitive species that has exceeded expectations. They are something that has never existed in galactic history." The evidence was overwhelming. Deep space monitoring stations detected massive construction projects and systems that humans had never officially explored. Dyson swarms around distant stars that collected energy on scales that dwarfed planetary consumption. Manufacturing facilities in asteroid belts that produced materials using technologies that manipulated matter at the quantum level. Ambassador Kex of the Trader Guild stood to address the assembly. His species had been tracking human economic activity for decades, always impressed by their efficiency and reliability. "Supreme Ethereal, if this analysis is correct, then humans have been conducting construction projects that require industrial capacity equivalent to entire galactic civilizations. How is this possible?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Human Ambassador David Walsh requested permission to address the Council. He had been serving as humanity's representative for 15 years, always presenting himself as a simple diplomat from a species grateful for galactic acceptance. Walsh walked to the center of the chamber with the calm confidence that Council members had learned to associate with humans. His appearance was unremarkable by galactic standards. Average height, simple clothing, no visible weapons or technological enhancements. But his words carried the authority of a species that had quietly become the most powerful force in the galaxy. "Honored representatives," Walsh began, his voice carrying clearly through the universal translation system, "my species has been operating under the assumption that galactic civilization is dying. Your rigid hierarchies prevent adaptation to changing conditions. Your stagnant technologies have not advanced significantly in thousands of years. Your fear of expansion beyond known space has left you vulnerable to threats you cannot imagine." The chamber erupted in angry protests. Species that had dominated the galaxy for millennia were not accustomed to being lectured by representatives of supposedly primitive worlds. Walsh waited patiently for silence before continuing. "We have been studying every failed civilization in galactic history. We have identified the patterns that lead to collapse. Overspecialization that prevents adaptation. Bureaucratic structures that prioritize stability over growth. Most critically, the belief that current success guarantees future survival." Walsh activated a holographic display that showed galactic civilization from humanity's perspective. The image was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. It revealed a network of interconnected systems that were far more fragile than anyone had realized. Critical resources that depended on single points of failure. Communication networks that could be disrupted by natural phenomena. Most disturbing, population centers that were completely defenseless against certain types of cosmic threats. "My species has been preparing for what we call the Great Filter, the inevitable point where a civilization either evolves to a higher level of existence or destroys itself. We have been positioning ourselves to guide galactic civilization through this transition. The revelation that followed changed everything. Humans had not been seeking to conquer or replace galactic civilization. They had been working to preserve it. Every human colony, every infrastructure project, every technological advancement had been designed to strengthen the galaxy's ability to survive unknown threats. Walsh continued his presentation with the methodical precision that characterized human planning. We have identified 17 different extinction-level scenarios that could destroy galactic civilization within the next century. Natural disasters that your current technology cannot prevent. Resource depletion that your economic systems cannot solve. Most critically, contact with hostile forces that your military capabilities cannot resist. The final revelation was the most shocking. Humans had been preparing for threats that had not yet materialized. Their deep space monitoring systems had detected anomalous energy signatures at the edge of known space. Something was coming that would test whether galactic civilization deserved to survive. Walsh's presentation concluded with a warning that left the council chamber in stunned silence. We have been preparing for dangers that your species cannot imagine because we have learned that the galaxy's greatest threats come not from war or catastrophe, but from complacency. We did not seek to conquer you. We sought to save you from yourselves. Zindar extended his consciousness through the ethereal collective, processing the implications of Walsh's revelation. Humanity had not just joined galactic civilization. They had quietly assumed responsibility for its survival. They had been building defenses against threats that other species did not even know existed. The chamber remained silent for several minutes as representatives processed information that challenged their understanding of galactic power structures. Finally, Chancellor Vex of the Cronin Empire spoke with the controlled anger that characterized his species. Ambassador Walsh, if humanity possesses the capabilities you describe, then you have the power to destroy us all. Why should we trust that your intentions are benevolent? Walsh smiled with the expression that had become familiar to those who worked closely with humans. It was the smile of a species that had looked into the abyss and chosen to build bridges instead of walls. Chancellor, we could have revealed our capabilities at any time over the past 50 years. We could have demanded tribute, territory, or submission. Instead, we chose to work quietly in the background, strengthening your civilizations while preparing for threats that would destroy us all if we faced them alone. The session ended with more questions than answers. Humanity had revealed themselves as something unprecedented in galactic history. They had evolved beyond individual species consciousness into something that operated on cosmic scales. They had been preparing for threats that would challenge the survival of all life in the galaxy. As representatives departed to brief their respective governments, Zindar remained in the chamber, contemplating the magnitude of what had been revealed. Humanity had not just risen quietly. They had been building something that would determine the fate of every living being in known space. The question now was whether the galaxy was ready to accept that their survival might depend on the species they had once dismissed as primitive newcomers. The Deep Space Monitoring Station at the edge of the galaxy registered the anomaly at exactly 1427 Galactic Standard Time. Dr. Michael Torres had been tracking the approaching energy signature for 3 months, watching it grow from a barely detectable quantum fluctuation into something that defied all known physics. The object was massive beyond comprehension. Preliminary scans suggested it was larger than most star systems, composed of matter that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Most disturbing of all, it was consuming everything in its path. Stars, planets, and entire solar systems simply ceased to exist as the entity passed through them. Michael activated the emergency communication network that connected every human facility in the galaxy. Within minutes, the combined intellectual power of humanity was focused on analyzing the approaching threat. The conclusions were unanimous and terrifying. The Devourers had returned. Galactic. Historical records contained fragmentary references to these entities from over 1 million years ago. They were described as cosmic nomads that traveled between galaxies, consuming matter and energy to fuel their journey through the void. Every civilization that had encountered them had either fled to distant galaxies or been completely destroyed. Captain Maya Patel received the activation codes while reviewing defensive preparations at the secret military facility orbiting Proxima Centauri. The installation had been disguised as a routine research station for decades, but it was actually the Command Center for Humanity's Galactic Defense Network. Maya had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Every human military officer had been trained for the possibility that humanity would need to defend not just their own species, but all life in the galaxy. The approaching Devourers represented the ultimate test of whether their preparations had been adequate. The transformation began immediately. Across hundreds of star systems, human installations that had masqueraded as civilian facilities revealed their true purpose. Manufacturing plants that had been producing consumer goods switched to weapons production. Research stations that had been studying peaceful applications of quantum physics began generating reality-altering technologies, most spectacular of all. The deep space construction projects that had puzzled galactic observers for decades activated. As a single coordinated system, Dyson swarms around distant stars began channeling stellar energy into massive defensive networks. Hidden facilities in asteroid belts started producing vessels that bent spacetime around themselves. Naya stood in the command center watching holographic displays that showed the galaxy transforming before her eyes. The defensive grid that humanity had been building in secret for 50 years was coming online. It was not just a military system. It was a galactic immune system designed to protect all life from threats that transcended normal understanding. The first engagement occurred in the Outer Rim, where automated defense platforms encountered the leading edge of the Devourer swarm. The battle was unlike anything in galactic military history. Human-designed weapons did not simply attack the Devourers. They manipulated the fundamental forces of reality to turn the entity's own consumption mechanisms against them. Quantum torpedoes that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously struck targets that phase-shifted through normal space. Energy weapons that operated on frequencies that did not exist in baseline reality disrupted the Devourer's matter conversion processes. Most effectively, gravitational manipulation systems created spatial distortions that trapped the entities in recursive loops where they consumed themselves. The galactic species watched in awe and terror as humanity revealed the true extent of their capabilities. Human fleets appeared seemingly from nowhere, equipped with vessels that resembled no known design. The ships moved through spacetime as if it were a navigable medium, appearing at multiple locations simultaneously through controlled quantum entanglement. Commander Rex Thorne of the Cronin military found himself coordinating with human defense forces in ways that his species had never imagined possible. Maya Patel was not just commanding ships. She was orchestrating an entire galactic defense network that operated on scales that challenged the understanding of military strategy. Commander, Maya's voice carried clearly through the quantum communication system. Your forces need to evacuate the Rigel sector immediately. We are implementing a space-time compression field that will isolate the Devourers but will be lethal to normal matter. Rex had seen enough impossible things in the past week to accept orders that made no sense according to conventional physics. Cronan fleets withdrew from the designated area just as reality itself seemed to fold inward. The Devourers that had been consuming everything in their path suddenly found themselves trapped in a spatial prison that existed outside normal dimensions. The battle continued for 6 days. Human defense networks engaged Devourer swarms across a front that spanned half the galaxy. Each engagement revealed new aspects of humanity's transformation. They were not just using advanced technology. They were manipulating the fundamental forces of reality itself. The turning point came when Maya implemented the final phase of humanity's defense strategy. Instead of simply destroying the Devourers, human forces began capturing them. Using technologies that existed at the intersection of quantum physics and consciousness manipulation, They were able to study and understand the entities that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years. The Devourers were not evil or malicious. They were simply following their nature as cosmic recyclers, converting matter and energy into forms that could survive the journey between galaxies. But their consumption was driven by quantum processes that could be redirected toward constructive purposes. Maya stood in the command center watching real-time displays of the most ambitious project in galactic history. Human forces were not just defeating the Devourers. They were transforming them into tools for galactic construction. The entities that had destroyed countless civilizations were being converted into reality-shaping forces that would help build something unprecedented. The final engagement occurred at the galactic core, where the largest Devourer entity had been consuming the supermassive black hole that anchored the galaxy's structure. Human forces surrounded the entity with a network of quantum field generators that operated on principles that had been purely theoretical. Until this moment, Maya activated the transformation sequence personally. The massive Devourer entity that had been consuming the galactic core suddenly stopped its destructive consumption. Instead, it began generating new forms of matter and energy that stabilized the black hole and created structural supports for the entire galaxy. The battle was over, but the transformation was just beginning. Humanity had not just defeated the Devourers. They had learned to harness their reality-consuming abilities for constructive purposes. The threat that would have ended galactic civilization had become the foundation for its next evolutionary leap. Maya looked at the holographic displays showing the galaxy after the battle. Human forces had revealed themselves as something that transcended normal species limitations. They existed simultaneously as individuals, as a collective organism, and as a cosmic force that could manipulate reality itself. The other galactic species faced a choice that would determine the future of all life in the galaxy. They could evolve alongside humanity or risk becoming obsolete. But Maya knew that humanity would not abandon the species they had spent 50 years protecting. The real work was just beginning. The Devourers had been defeated, but their arrival had triggered changes that would reshape the galaxy forever. Humanity had passed their ultimate test, proving that they were ready to serve as guardians of all life. The question now was whether the galaxy was ready to accept the responsibilities that came with survival. The transformed galaxy sparkled with new possibilities as Sarah Kim walked through the observation deck of the rebuilt Galactic Council headquarters. The structure floated in folded space-time that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, allowing representatives from across the galaxy to meet without the limitations of conventional physics. 3 months had passed since the Devourer crisis, and the galaxy was still adjusting to the reality of what humanity had become. The entities that had threatened to consume all life now served as construction tools, converting matter and energy into forms that enabled technologies that previous generations could barely imagine. Sarah served as humanity's primary liaison to the new Galactic Council, but her role was unlike any diplomatic position in galactic history. She was not just representing human interests. She was coordinating the evolution of galactic civilization itself. The first challenge had been helping other species understand that humanity's transformation did not make them superior to other life forms. They had simply become something different. Their collective consciousness allowed them to think on cosmic scales, but they retained their individual humanity and their commitment to protecting all life. Dr. Emma Rodriguez, now serving as their council's chief xenobiologist, had documented the changes occurring throughout the galaxy. Species that had been stagnant for millennia were suddenly developing new capabilities. The ethereal collective had learned to extend their telepathic abilities across multiple dimensions. The Cronin Empire had developed technologies that combined their military expertise with human reality manipulation principles. The galaxy is evolving, Emma reported during the weekly council session. Every species is discovering capabilities they never knew they possessed. Humanity's transformation is not just changing humans. It is triggering evolutionary leaps throughout galactic civilization. The changes were not just technological. The social structures that had defined galactic civilization for thousands of years were being rebuilt from the ground up. The rigid hierarchies that had prevented adaptation were being replaced by fluid networks that emphasized cooperation and shared growth. Supreme Ethereal Zindar had adapted to working with human collective consciousness in ways that enhanced both species' capabilities. The combination of ethereal telepathy and human quantum networks created communication possibilities that transcended individual species' limitations. Sarah, Zindar's mental voice carried harmonics that indicated deep satisfaction. Your species has achieved something that we believed was impossible. You have demonstrated that evolution can occur through cooperation rather than competition. The galaxy is becoming something greater than the sum of its parts. The most remarkable transformation was occurring on worlds that had been devastated by the Devourer crisis. Instead of rebuilding using traditional methods, the combined efforts of human and alien civilizations were creating environments that existed in harmony with natural laws that had been modified by Devourer-derived technologies. Children of dozens of species played together in parks that existed in folded space-time, where the laws of physics had been gently adjusted to allow for impossible playgrounds. Trees grew in patterns that resembled mathematical equations, their leaves changing color according to quantum fluctuations that created art from the fundamental forces of reality. Sarah walked through one of these parks, watching young humans play with ethereal children whose telepathic abilities had been enhanced by exposure to human quantum networks. Cronin youngsters demonstrated physical capabilities that combined their species' natural strength with human-designed enhancements that allowed them to manipulate matter at the molecular level. The real work was happening on levels that most beings could not perceive. Humanity's collective consciousness was simultaneously engaged in thousands of projects that spanned multiple galaxies. They were building defenses against threats that had not yet materialized. They were developing technologies that would enable all species to survive challenges that transcended normal understanding. Commander Rex Thorne, now serving as the galaxy's coordinated defense chief, had learned to work with human military networks that operated on principles that challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare. The galaxy was not just protected by weapons and shields. It was defended by reality itself, which had been modified to be hostile to forces that sought to destroy life. Sarah, Rex reported during their weekly security briefing, our monitoring systems have detected energy signatures that suggest other cosmic entities are approaching the galaxy. But instead of preparing for battle, humanity is sending diplomatic missions to make contact before they arrive. The approaching entities were not necessarily hostile. They were simply following their nature as cosmic forces that had been traveling between galaxies for millions of years. But humanity's experience with the Devourers had taught them that even the most dangerous cosmic phenomena could be understood and redirected toward constructive purposes. The transformation of galactic civilization was not without challenges. Species that had defined themselves through conflict and competition struggled to adapt to a reality where cooperation provided greater advantages. Some individuals and groups resisted the changes, preferring the familiar limitations of their previous existence, but the benefits of evolution were becoming impossible to ignore. Diseases that had plagued species for millennia were being cured using technologies that operated on quantum biological principles. Resource scarcity was becoming obsolete as matter itself could be converted into any needed form. Most importantly, the fear of extinction that had driven much of galactic politics was being replaced by confidence in collective survival. Sarah received a communication from the deep space monitoring stations that had detected the approaching cosmic entities. The messages were not hostile warnings or invasion threats. They were expressions of curiosity from beings that had never encountered a galaxy where multiple species had achieved collective consciousness while maintaining individual identity. The galaxy was becoming something unprecedented in cosmic history. Not a collection of competing species struggling for survival, but a unified organism that could think and act on scales that transcended individual worlds or solar systems. Sarah, stood before the assembled representatives of every species in the galaxy. The meeting was being held in the quantum conference chamber that existed simultaneously in hundreds of locations, allowing beings from across known space to participate, without leaving their homeworlds. "Fellow beings," Sarah began, her voice carrying through translation networks that now operated on frequencies that conveyed not just words but emotions and intentions. "We have reached a point where we must make a choice about our future. The approaching cosmic entities represent an opportunity to extend our evolutionary progress beyond this galaxy." The proposal was ambitious beyond anything previously imagined. Using the reality-shaping technologies developed from captured Devourer essence, galactic civilization could establish contact with other galaxies. They could share their discoveries about cooperative evolution with cosmic communities that might still be trapped in cycles of competition and conflict. Dr. Lisa Chun, now serving as the galaxy's chief physicist, presented the technical specifications for intergalactic communication and transportation systems. The technologies required resources and coordination on scales that would have been impossible before humanity's transformation had triggered galaxy-wide evolution. "The mathematics are complex but achievable," Lisa explained, her consciousness simultaneously connected to research teams across thousands of worlds. "We can create stable corridors through space-time that will allow us to maintain contact with other galaxies while preserving the unique evolutionary paths that each cosmic community has developed." The vote was unanimous. Every species in the galaxy agreed to participate in the project that would establish them as a force for positive evolution throughout the universe. The construction began immediately, with human collective consciousness coordinating efforts that spanned multiple dimensions. Earth had become the symbolic center of the new galactic civilization, but it was no longer just a world. It existed in folded space-time that allowed it to serve as a meeting point for beings from across the galaxy while maintaining connection to its historical significance as humanity's birthplace. Sarah returned to Earth for the ceremony that would mark the completion of the intergalactic communication network. She stood in Central Park, which now existed in a reality where the laws of physics had been gently modified to accommodate visitors from species that required different environmental conditions. Children from dozens of worlds played games that would have been impossible under normal physics. Adults worked on projects that combined the knowledge and capabilities of every species in the galaxy. Art installations created by cooperative efforts between human imagination and alien sensory capabilities produced beauty that transcended anything individual species could achieve alone. The activation of the intergalactic network occurred at sunset, though the concept of time had become fluid in the new reality. Sarah watched as the sky filled with quantum displays that showed successful contact with galaxy after galaxy across the cosmic web. The responses were overwhelming. Cosmic communities that had been isolated for millions of years suddenly had access to the knowledge and friendship of beings who had learned to evolve through cooperation rather than conflict. The galaxy that had once feared humanity's quiet rise had become a beacon of hope for the entire universe. The final revelation came as Sarah received the first detailed communications from the approaching cosmic entities. They were not just travelers seeking resources or territory. They were refugees from a distant galaxy that had been consumed by forces that made the Devourers seem harmless by comparison. "Sarah," the message carried harmonics that conveyed desperation and hope simultaneously, "we have been searching for a galaxy that had learned to defend itself against the forces that destroy cosmic civilizations. Your species has achieved something that we believed was impossible. You have created a community that can survive anything the universe might produce." The true scope of humanity's achievement became clear. They had not just saved their own galaxy from the Devourers. They had developed a form of civilization that could survive and protect against threats that operated on cosmic scales. The quiet species that had once been dismissed as primitive newcomers had become the guardians of life itself. Sarah looked up at the stars, which now showed the quantum networks that connected their galaxy to thousands of others across the universe. Humanity had kept their promise. They had preserved galactic civilization by transforming it into something greater than anyone had imagined possible. The future stretched ahead with infinite possibilities. New threats would emerge from the depths of space and time. Cosmic forces beyond current understanding would challenge the survival of all life. But the galaxy was ready. Humanity had risen. Quietly, and in doing so, they had ensured that the light of consciousness would never be extinguished. The story ended where it began, with humanity working quietly in the background. But now they were not alone. They had become part of something magnificent, a cosmic community that proved that evolution's greatest achievements came not through conquest or domination, but through the courage to lift others up and the wisdom to face the unknown together.